Hey y'all, I'm Kim, host of Book Marketing Mania, and I'm so thrilled you're tuning in to learn how to build your audience and reach new readers on podcast. This week, we're wrapping up our series of podcast interviews with author spotlights on new friends that I have connected with through the Podmatch service that we talked about in episode 131. I can't wait for you to hear from my sweet friend, Healey Ikerd. Healey is a licensed professional counselor in private practice and the author of 2 books, Changing Your Feelings, a workbook for anxiety and worry from a Christian perspective, and her newest release is a children's book, The Red Ball, a story of forgiveness and friendship. Healey and I have actually worked together in the past on her podcast pitching strategy, but we officially connected as her as a potential guest for me on Podmatch. So, of course, I had to say yes and get her scheduled ASAP. And I can't wait for you to hear her tips on overcoming the anxiety we have about marketing our messages, especially from a biblical point of view. Plus, Healey's going to share her incredible experience she has had with Podmatch, which I'm super excited for y'all to hear about. You are in for a treat today, so let's get to it. Well, hey, Healey, I'm so thrilled you're here to be on Book Marketing Mania to serve my listeners today.
Yay, thank you so much for having me, Kim. I appreciate that.
This is so fun. Well, so tell us, I have a copy of this book in my hand and I just love it. And I want you to tell our listeners about Changing Your Feelings and who you wrote it for.
Well, I wrote it specifically for Christians that are struggling with anxiety or worry. I work with clients in my private practice, and there were a lot of Christians coming to me for anxiety and worry. So that's why I created it. And the book's basically it's unique to the Christian struggle. So it's biblical concepts and cognitive behavioral therapy techniques merged together to help specifically Christians, because that is a unique way to look at and handle anxiety.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love that it's the workbook that you can really put your pen to paper and really journal through what you're struggling with. And like you say, bringing in those biblical principles. And I think it would be such a great book to share with somebody, or certainly for yourself, that if you're thinking about counseling and you're just not sure about it, because I know the first time I went to counseling, it was scary, you just never know. And it feels so weird. And especially being a super introvert and a stuffer, so it's like talking about all of my feelings and all those things. Yeah, it does not get me excited. But
Right.
I wish I would have had something like this to kind of help me prepare, because I think that would have been so much easier for me if I had taken some time to do that. And to maybe even understanding like some of the terms you use in there that we may not be as familiar with, but just having an awareness of those and the way you explain them, it's so easy to understand, would help so much. So even if you never go to any kind of counseling, this is an excellent book to help you work through those feelings. So I'm just so excited for our listeners just to hear more about it. And so I know we had talked, Healey, about just writing a book and marketing it, brings up all kinds of different sets of anxieties and worries and doubts. And so I want you to talk through some of those, what you have been through, and then as well as maybe share some tips for our listeners that are struggling with the same as they, maybe they're just now writing a book and trying to figure out if they're going to pitch it to a publisher, or they're, trying to figure out who to start talking to online, or, if they have the book in hand. It's like there's just so many things that get worked up in our minds. So I would love for you just to share any thoughts you have on that.
Yeah. When I released Changing Your Feelings, it was a different time. I didn't know much. I just released it in an effort really to help people I knew that were struggling with anxiety, that were Christians, and then my own clients. Because I recently released a children's book. And that is what brought on, because the publisher that I was working with told me all the marketing stuff, said you need to do this and this. And I didn't even know what half the terms meant. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do all this. What is all this? And so I had lunch with an author friend, and she kind of gave me a few tips and calmed me down, and just a few steps at a time. And that's where I kind of got connected with podcast and helping me just learn all the stuff. I did some workshops and seminars. but the actual release, because I think writing is very vulnerable, at least to me,
Mhm.
it is.
Mhm.
It's like my soul. It's kind of like cooking. Like when you serve someone a meal,
Uh-huh.
it's like you want it to be good. You want people to
Uh-huh.
like it. And that's what I wanted for this book too. I didn't realize though, even though I had a plan of marketing per se,
Uh-huh.
I didn't realize how caught up I would get or consumed even in the process of likes and follows and
Oh, yeah.
reviews and all that stuff. And it created a lot of anxiety in me and a
Mhm.
lot of self doubt because it almost feels like if people don't like the book, they don't like me, or I'm not
Mhm.
a worthy writer, or I'm not a good writer. So I had a lot of what ifs, even before the book was released. And then after I kind of launched it into the world, then it was like, is my launch team big enough? Is anybody
Uh-huh.
going to like it? What if they hate it? Is it a good book? I mean, what if they find out I'm a really bad writer? Or
Yeah.
what if it gets bad reviews? I mean, because I work in that area all the time, like I knew how to talk myself back out of that.
Uh-huh.
But I was discouraged by the fact that I could get all caught up in all the other aspects, even like being a bestseller, top
Mhm.
of the new releases. I mean, all that is a little just bit overwhelming to the psyche. So I was able
Mhm.
to kind of talk myself through that. And I think it's almost, well, I kind of had my epiphany a month or so back of just, I was praying to God, like, I don't understand, God, why I don't have more sales on this book. Like, I think it's a good message. And this is kind of one of the tips I think that has helped me so much is I just felt like, why did you write the book? So that thought came to me and I was like, well, I
Uh-huh.
wrote it, number one, and this was the children's book specifically. I said,
Uh-huh.
I wrote it to honor you, God, and I wrote it to honor my mom. And so the question is, what did you do those things? Well, I think the book has done those things. I mean, like even if it doesn't
Mhm.
sell any, I do believe that it's done those two things. And so
Mhm.
that really gave me a piece of like I can rest in I accomplished the mission as it was given
Mhm.
to me. And those two things, like I would like, everybody to have a message of forgiveness, which is what the children's book's about. But honestly, I have to always go back to my heart and what am I looking at? What am I getting focused on? Because I always want to come back, regardless where I'm in life. I want God more than anything else. I do want
Mhm.
Him more than book sales and to be a bestseller. I mean, I like those
Mhm.
things, but
Yeah.
God has his reasons of like, whatever. So,
Yeah.
uh, that I want him more than all that. And so I always constantly have to do a heart check on that of, am I doing these things for the right reasons? And am I pursuing God more than I'm pursuing the other stuff? Am I consumed with
Mhm.
him as much as I'm consumed with checking my sales or my ranking
Mhm.
or whatever I can
Yeah.
all get caught up in?
Oh God, yeah,
So
that's a good word for us any day of the week, regardless of whether we're an author or not. Well, so two things I was thinking
that's
of. First, I did not ask you, and I'm sorry, Healy. I want you to share the name of your children's book, and so everybody knows about, and share the connection with your mom too.
okay. Well, the book is called The Red Ball. It's a story of forgiveness and friendship, which is the subtitle. And my mom grew up in, it was called East Germany at that
Uh huh.
time. And so they were very poverty stricken, and she got a gift of a ball from her grandmother. And she had told me this story about receiving it and how thankful she was, and just how everybody loved it because nobody had any toys. So that
Mm-hmm.
was like a really big thing in the neighborhood, is this ball. So one day I was driving home from her house and was like, that I think would make a good story. Of course, I had to, you know, add some stuff to it to
Uh
make it
huh.
like a legitimate
Yeah.
story, to have some conflict and resolution and all that. But that's kind of where it came from. And her birthday was like a week before release date. And so we had gone to lunch and I'd wrapped up the book because I happened to
Oh.
get a copy before. So I was excited about that and wrapped it up. And she cried when she saw it because I talked to her through the
Uh
process, to
huh.
make sure I got some things right. And so it's probably a little bit wordy for a children's book, but I really wanted to get some of the details of her life in there.
Uh
And
huh.
so that she would be honored, because that was one of my goals in that. And so,
Uh-huh.
yeah, she was excited and she really liked the story. So anyway, she's faint.
Yeah.
But
Oh, that's
yeah,
so,
it
so
was,
sweet. Yeah.
yeah, it was great. The whole thing's been a great process, but also a little
Yeah.
bit, where I'm constantly doing heart checks on myself to make sure
Uh-huh.
too that I'm practicing what I preach every day. Like
Yeah.
if I'm not high ranking or selling a lot of books, does that mean I'm a terrible person? And I
Mm-hmm.
have to check myself with that, because that's one of my parts of my story of like having really low self-esteem and not really
Mm-hmm.
understanding the way that God saw me in my early years. So that's always going to be a tender spot, that thing that always pops up kind of quickly when something's not going
Uh-huh.
exactly the way that I want. But luckily, I at least have enough training that I can go, okay, Healey, it's time to get your thoughts focused on truth. What is
Uh-huh.
the truth? And the truth is that God loves me regardless. Am I, pursuing him? That's what I want to be doing. And so I readjust and realign and get back on course there.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And I was thinking about, I don't know if you know Shannon Popkin, and for the life of me, I can't
I
think of what
think
her
I
name of her
follow her.
podcast is, but she's an author. She's been on the show a while back. I'll have to link to her episode, but she wrote a book called The Comparison Girl. And when she was on the show, she was talking about, maybe God didn't call all of us to write best-selling books, and we have to be okay with that. And if we just keep thinking about it, like, you're right, I mean, it can happen, right, for anybody. But I mean, it's just like that may not be the path he put us on. And like how you were talking about, you just have these questions you're going to ask yourself. Am I honoring him? Did I do what I set out to do as an author that he called me to do? And then that's all I'm supposed to do. Like, sure, we could have these big dreams and things, but like you said, if we don't achieve those, it doesn't mean that wasn't God's plan, or we're a bad person, or we didn't do something right. So thinking of all those things, like what you just said, Healy, if you can lean on your training and what you know of, being a counselor and working with lots and lots of people. But for those of us that haven't had that kind of experience, but we're encountering these anxieties and doubts and things, what are some simple things that you would recommend for our listeners to do when that happens?
One thing, I would remind people to ask themselves the why question. Why did
Mm-hmm.
you first set out to write it, and answer those questions? And then focus on truth of the situation. I mean, one of the things that is so true about comparison, that is a joy stealer when we
Mm-hmm.
compare, or it's a pride builder, either one, because we can do it the other way. Oh, at least my book's doing better than them. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and that's prideful. I don't think that's God honoring either. And the other way is like, oh my gosh, they're so much better. But I have to remember that God has the hairs on our head numbered. And
Mm-hmm.
that is, to me, that speaks to me in the way that God has made us so unique, that he's created us our own story. And even though we may have similar parts as other people, which can encourage us and strengthen us and all that,
Mm-hmm.
but our story is still going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants it that way. And that's why we really have to stay focused on the truth of who God made us to be, and not be looking off in other directions of, yeah, I'm not them, I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
bestseller, or I am a bestseller and I'm doing better than them, ha ha, or whatever, like
Yeah.
those are all tempting things. But staying focused on who has God made us to be? And
Uh-huh.
it may look very different, and that's a good thing. Even
Mm-hmm.
though it may not be like what we might imagine in our minds, it's still a good thing that he's created a unique plan and journey for us. I mean, how cherished should we feel that he's got a special plan for us?
Yeah,
That's
that's
awesome
so
to me.
true. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And just focus on that and not get wrapped up around what everybody else around you is doing, and just stay on your path. That's easier
Yeah.
said than done, of course.
That's a
So with all
daily
that,
thing for me,
yeah,
because
yeah,
I'm
daily
always like,
reminder.
Healy, focus.
Oh gosh, that's so true. It never goes away. We want it to, but it doesn't.
Right.
So now that you've got two books under your belt and published out into the world, what's working well for Healy to market her books today?
Well, again, I think that my journey is going to be unique, but what has been working well is constantly being in prayer, because
Uh-huh.
that's where God has spoke to me in different things of like, because I was getting really, this was before my book release, of like, oh
Uh-huh.
my gosh, I got to build a platform. I got to do an email
Mm-hmm.
list. I got to do all these things, which are very important. And
Mm-hmm.
God has called some people to that. But one day, as I was listening to a sermon, I was praying, and God said, Healey, you don't worry about the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about all that. And I was like, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And that really just set me free. I mean, if it builds, that's
Uh-huh.
wonderful. But if it doesn't, that's okay too. Like,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. And if I do have some people on my email list, great.
Uh-huh.
I don't feel the pressure of newsletters, or like I'll write when I feel led to write. And I
Uh-huh.
know when that prompting of the spirit is like, you need to share this, then I'll do that. And
Uh-huh.
just being able to just follow God's call, and like, I know these things of marketing are important, but in that, as I create a plan, can I be flexible enough to not beat myself up about,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing this and this and this, of just letting God guide me to where he wants me. And so it may
Mm-hmm.
not be a big platform. That's my
Yeah.
journey, but him just giving me freedom as I stay in prayer of following the plan that he wants me to follow. And
Uh-huh.
that's going to look very different than, you know, other people's plan. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Even though it can be scary and like, oh, I should be doing these things. That would
Uh-huh.
probably help my sales. But then again, I'd rather just have peace.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that right there is like just end the show. That's like so perfect, Ely. I mean, because it's so true. I was thinking about Shannon again, just thinking, well, yeah, God doesn't call us all to have these huge platforms, and what even if that we feel like that's our desire, just the work it takes, because it does take work, obviously. He may not be calling us to that too. Like, just like you have to just kind of break it all down. Like, okay, I could go do this, and yeah, I could maybe get more book sales out of it, but this is what it's going to require. And I don't feel like God's calling me to do that piece of it, and to be
Right.
okay with it. Like you say, just to have
Yeah.
that peace that you don't have to do all the things for sure. Because I know, like, I'm gonna jump this question on Healey because she knew I was gonna ask her this, but this is a perfect example, right? Because I have asked Healey for a while now about starting a podcast, and I think she would have a lot to offer on a podcast. But you haven't started one yet. I don't know if you're still considering one, Healey. But
I
that
am.
right there, I mean, before you even answer, I'm going to say like that right there. I feel like is so like God's not calling me to that. Like it's not there may be fears and doubts and all those things wrapped up in it, but it also may just be God is not calling me to that right now, and that's okay. So, what is your answer to that about starting a podcast, Healy?
Well, honestly, it's been on my mind for a couple of years, and my family would say, Healy, don't you take on one more thing.
Yeah.
And that is where my heart always has to come in check, because I want
Hmm.
to, if I'm going to do it, because I do feel led to do that,
Hmm.
but I want to be in the right heart check for it. Like,
Yeah.
can you not get consumed with, not enough listeners, or like all
Yes.
the stuff that I'm sure, that's important in a
Uh
podcast.
huh.
Like,
Yeah.
I have to have my why.
Uh
Am
huh.
I going to be able to stay focused on truth for as far
Hmm.
as my thoughts go, that I can stay focused on those things? So those are probably my delays, and it's a whole nother area I need to search in. But as far as learning stuff and all
Hmm.
that, and I would be going through the same struggles that I have,
Hmm.
like with marketing this book. And I always want to make sure my heart's right. I just don't want it to get off. And I think God's always dealing with me on certain things.
Uh
And I
huh.
think that's why I always go back to like, he's probably not going, just because I know a little bit about my journey with
Uh
God.
huh.
It's like,
Yeah.
is not going to probably make me this big name
Uh huh.
because of my own struggles, because I don't think that would be good for my heart. So
Uh
that's
huh.
why I always have to go back to those heart checks and
Yeah.
just stay. I want to pursue him with all my heart and
Hmm.
nothing else. And if I can, like I do, I love encouraging people.
Hmm.
I love where people can have epiphanies, or they can walk in healing. Like, that does my soul a lot of good. But then I
Hmm.
also have to always be watching that pride too, because that can creep in so easily. Like
Yes.
the enemy is like literally crouching at the door, waiting for any opportunity to go, just to get you in a little area. And I just don't want to be opening that door to
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, I think
So
that's so true because what like you kind of get at that place where you're like, okay, I can let this go. Like I'm okay with, like I know I think about that with my podcast. I mean, from the very beginning, I was like, I'm just not going to look at the numbers. Like, I just because I
mhm.
knew that was an issue and it would be an issue for me. True. And I've only looked at them when I had to, like, I have somebody else helps me
Mhm.
with that part of it. And I'm like, I just need you to do this part because I don't want to see these numbers. But then it's like you say, the enemy then like throws something in front of you where you see somebody sharing their numbers, and you're like, well, I wonder how mine stack up to that, like you
Right.
do. And you
Yeah.
do just have to be like, no, that's because, it's not
Yeah.
good for our hearts to go down that path. I mean, some people, it's fine, right? They can just take themselves out of it and look at it as
Mhm.
data or whatever. But I know I'm not good about doing that. So yeah. So okay, so that's hosting a podcast. So maybe one day in the future, if God calls her to it, we'll hear a podcast
Mhm.
that Healey hosts and just reach out to me anytime because I'd love to help you with that, Healey.
Oh, I would have to.
One thing I do know you're doing, and you're doing an awesome job of it, like today, is being a guest on podcasts because I've seen a couple of my sweet friends
Mhm.
that you've gotten to be on their show, and it just warms my heart so much. So,
Oh.
talk about your journey with being a guest on podcasts, whether that's podcasts that you have reached out to yourself, or you've also been taking advantage of the Podmatch service.
Well, I appreciate you so much for being a connector of people. Oh my goodness. I've heard that said about you, but you really do that well. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
thank you.
Yes, that was another thing. I was like, oh my gosh, pitching a podcast sounds
Hmm.
scary and overwhelming. I mean, I'm an introvert.
Uh
So
huh.
that was just like, I'm selling myself. I don't know. But I did have like a sample little letter I did create.
Uh huh.
Or maybe you helped me with that. I'm not
Uh
sure.
huh.
But I got on Podmatch because I'd heard you talking about it.
Uh huh.
And oh my gosh, that's like the best invention
It
ever.
is.
So I match with people that, yes, ended up being like perfect. Sometimes I'll match with some that I'll actually ended up becoming a listener to some
Hmm.
and didn't think, well, I probably don't have anything to lend to that audience.
Uh
But
huh.
yeah, it has been an awesome thing for me just because, you can still pitch, but sometimes I've just had people reach out to me, which I love that
Yeah.
much more. That's more my
Yeah.
style in life.
Yeah.
I always say I would have no friends if no one reached out to me.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So thank goodness people do that.
I was just thinking about that. Like I've been using Podmatch as a host. I have not turned to the guesting side yet, but I want to because I want to be able to share, my experience with that. But that's what I'm always excited when I meet people. A lot of people I've just connected with on Podmatch. You and I have connected way before that. But I love hearing your journey about that, and just you even saying that. Like I didn't even think about the fact that. I mean, I think it makes it easier, but it's just the fact that like you can almost just sit back and let them come to you. Like you just
Yep.
can't do that any other way. But yeah, and that's what happens to me as a host. Like I'm just so blown away by, how the system just matches people up with me. And then, the ball's in my court. I can say pass
Mhm.
or no pass and, match up without even having to talk with the guest, which is
Right.
so, so nice. But
Yes.
yeah, I've been so blown away by the people I've met. And just like you say, it's like, sometimes they host a podcast and I'm like, how did I not know about this podcast? So it's
Exactly.
such a cool way because I think there's not as many people in our niche of Christian podcasters on Podmatch. There are some, but I mean, there's not as far as like when we go to these other like Facebook groups that I know you and I connect in as well. There's like a whole slew of them. So I
Mhm.
love that it's kind of a little bit different. So you're getting different audiences and different podcasts. So I'd love to hear for authors like yourself, Healey, maybe they're a first time author and they're just thinking about reaching out to be a guest on podcasts, but they have those anxieties and doubts, wrapped around like, who am I to be a guest on podcast? Or, they're scared to reach out to somebody they don't know. Do you
Mhm.
have any encouragement to share with them?
Well, if I can do it, then because I think I said that exact question. Why would anybody want me? I don't have anything to offer. But in your words, like I think you told me that I do have the unique perspective of just being me,
Hmm.
and that can resonate with people. That is one good thing about Podmatch too, like I was able to do a few interviews and get some under my belt that probably weren't even my audience per se, but they wanted me on. So I did that, and it helped me get some experience. So I would say probably don't hit the big ones first. Like just go for a few that may not be your audience just to get some practice. Because it took me 2 or 3 until I finally figured out, like, okay, what am I doing here? Like I was focused on my book. So if we didn't talk a whole lot about my book, I thought, oh, it's a failure. And so I went in with the perspective, and you've probably said this on podcasts, and I've heard other people too, of like, we're there to serve the readers, or in this case, we're there to serve the listeners. And so once I was like, okay, after about 3 podcasts that weren't so great, I was like, okay, let me just see if I can help people. Like, surely I've got some sort of knowledge that I can just try to encourage people and help them. And then they started doing, like, I at least felt more confident about them, and God, probably did things despite me. So that helps. That is one thing that's so encouraging about being a Christian. Like, you can trust God to just use, if you mess up, like, he's not going to love you any less.
Yeah.
And Christians, they're grace filled. Like, they're not going to think terrible things most of the time. I mean, at the end of the day, whether you mess up, do great, or you do terrible, like, God still loves you. He thinks you're the bomb. Like, he sent his son for you. Like, we can relish in that fact. So regardless of how things turned out, we are loved by the creator of the universe. Wow. That's so powerful.
Yes.
And can put our mind at ease. Like, even if I say something really crazy, like, God still loves me. And probably they'll edit that part out.
And that's okay.
Hopefully.
Yeah, that's the beauty
And
of
if
podcasting,
not, we're
for
okay.
Sure.
We're still survive.
Oh, I know. That's so true. I mean, in every episode, if it's a solo episode, a guest episode, you're the guest, whatever, there's always mistakes made. You could edit them out, or you could just leave them in and be like, oh, well, like, they're still going to get value out of it. I mean, it's just, and I love that. I think that's how society is becoming more like, it's just so much more casual. Nobody's expecting those perfect answers. And I think when we hear you as a guest, it's just so much more authentic, right? Where you're not worked up. And especially, like you said, about if you're focused on serving, not selling your book, it's just, like you just said, it's just like a relief off of your shoulders, and you can just relax and ease into it. And I'm glad you mentioned too about, like, just getting practice under your belt. And like you said, there may be some that reach out to you, especially on a service like Podmatch, is you may get people that reach out to you that maybe their audience isn't the target audience of your book, but they may be a target audience some other way. Like, I think, especially with you, Healey, and I know we talked a lot about this in our strategy sessions, you have all this mental health expertise that you can bring to the table. And granted, your target audience is a Christian audience, but I'm sure in your clinic, you don't only work with Christians. And, your past experience hasn't only been with Christians. And, there's just so many people out there that need help. And so I can see, like, when a mental health professional pops up as a possible match, like, there's so many struggles our listeners go through that they would want to have you on the show. And it would help a lot of people. But like you say, that just helps you get a little bit more experience under your belt and give you a little bit more confidence than to reach out to more shows that maybe are your target listeners. So, oh gosh, well, this has been so good, Healey. Is there any last words you would want to share with our listeners?
Well, when dealing with anxiety, worry, or self-doubt, one of the things I always tell my clients is we always have to go back to truth. Like, it's our self-talk that's the killer to us most of the time. And if we can stay truthful in that, encouraging and helpful as we speak to ourselves and as we speak to others, then that will help us overcome a lot of that stuff that keeps us or ends up paralyzing us to not be on a podcast, or not finish our book, or not go somewhere and talk. Like, it's our self-talk that can make or break us. And thankfully, we serve a God who speaks truth, encouragement, and helpfulness to us, and we can do that same thing for ourselves. So that's all I would encourage them to do.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's wonderful. Well, I will be sure to put links to both of your books so they can check them out, as well as your website. And Healey, I just can't thank you enough for today. This has been so incredible. Yeah, I love it.
Appreciate it.
Oh, y'all, I absolutely love connecting with new friends and getting to serve you at the same time. I hope that Healey's author journey inspired you with new ideas for your own and that you learned some new ways to battle those internal thoughts around book marketing and podcasting. And this episode wraps up our Spotlight series on authors and publishers that I've connected with through Podmatch. And I hope you'll check out the platform, as it is truly a great way to connect with new guests for your show and to get yourself in front of new audiences as a podcast guest. Thanks for tuning in today, and as always, I'll be there for you next episode to help you build your audience and reach new readers one podcast at a time. See you then.